Everyone, this is Saeed Gordon with DOF Creations and our Service Driven University series. Today, I'm joined by Brian Dutton with the Assured Data Protection team. They're one of the largest partners with Rubrik, who we work with as well. They make sure that Rubrik resources can be amplified in their impact, providing managed disaster recovery resources and remediation support. We wanted to include Brian today in the Assured team to discuss some of the challenges that we're seeing. We know every single year, it seems like almost every week, there's a new or major event that occurs and brings disaster recovery and incident response back to the front of our minds. So this is a conversation that we've had kind of in passing when we've talked about policy development, cyber insurance policies and practices. But now we're going to be focusing here just on incident response, disaster recovery, and what are the things to do to be best prepared in the event of an attack and to try to recover most quickly. So Brian, if you will, introduce yourself, introduce Assured. Who are you and how long have you been doing this?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us today. My name is Brian Dutton, and I am the Director of Channel and Revenue Operations, which means that I have the channel team, the sales team, and client services. We are a managed service provider, so we do managed backup and DR as a service, which we're going to talk about today. But I think the big point of today's conversation is recovery, right? So how do we recover from different types of situations? As mentioned, we are Rubrik's oldest and largest managed service provider. So we've been doing this for about 8 years now, global company. So we've got data centers all over the world, and we have customers all over the world as well.
All right. Well, I know you have a presentation prepared for us today. I'm going to try not to interrupt you too much, but I will say that some of our customers have had recent experiences with attacks or ransom events. Some of our customers have had some scares that fortunately didn't turn out to be anything. And then other folks we're working with are focused more on the prevention side, policy, security testing, but of course, trying to make sure that their incident response team knows what to do, how quickly they can recover, and all those types of things. So I'm sure as you're speaking today, I'll have questions or things that come back to mind, and I'm sure I'm going to have a couple of things that you can probably shed some light on for us.
Sure, absolutely. Jump in whenever it hits you, right? Love to answer your questions. But as I mentioned, that we want to talk about recovery. Backup isn't the most exciting thing in the world to talk about. Everyone needs to back up, but I think the ability to recover is so important because those bad actors are attacking the backups first, right? Before they get into environments. So for us, I think one of the most important things we like to talk about is immutability. Immutable backups is the key. And what immutability means essentially is that once you back something up, it cannot be changed or altered. And Rubrik is kind of the penicillin of the backup world, if you will. They came up with a proprietary file share system where the backups cannot be altered. And I don't think they realized when they created it how important that was going to be when ransomware really hit the scene. So it is natively immutable, which means that there's nothing that you need to add to it, bolt onto it to make it immutable. So we see that some of the other competitive solutions are talking about immutability, and they're configuring or bolting on or creating solutions to make their environments immutable. But the more complexity you add, the more difficulty and more expense that we see. And also, if you can turn something on, then you can turn it off. And I think that's important when it comes to, bad actors and how they get in and what they can do in your environments. So in order to have a robust backup solution in place, you got to make sure your backups are natively immutable. I think the next big piece we're going to talk about today is disaster recovery plan. And make sure that you're in a place where you are protecting yourself in the worst situations. So you need to assume that everything is tainted, from the network to the infrastructure, down to the server, even the USB stick is infected, right? So what do you do? What can you do to recover if you're assuming everything's infected? So we're going to walk through that today and how assured data protection can bring people back from those types of scenarios. You also got to assume that disaster is going to strike at the worst time. It's never at 10 o'clock on the Tuesday. It's Christmas Eve or Black Friday, or the worst time that is possible is when they're going to hit you. So making sure you have a team that's 24/7, 365, follow the sun is very important.
Can I stop you for a second, Brian?
Sure.
You mentioned that the backups are often the first resource targeted. Um, when did we start? When did we see that as the trend or the norm? And do we think there is a way to change that? Because I know, ransomware attacks, malware attacks, all of these different things kind of go through their own trends and seasons. But understanding that your backups are kind of the best way to cripple you, because if you can't recover, then what else are you going to do? When did we see that as kind of the norm, and what do we think we can do to try to shift that, or can that change?
Yeah, so we put the protections in place to prepare for that event happening, right? So the bad actors go in and they turn back your retention policies to 0, so that when you back something up, it's not being backed up. It's basically being deleted from the environment.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so yeah, so they're going in, they're messing with the retention policies. So you think you're doing dailies, weeklies, monthlies, and yearlies, but they've turned it back so that it deletes off. Um, so if that happens, and then they encrypt your environment, and you go to your backups and nothing's there, that's when they've got you, right? So with our solution, we're going to talk about replicating that data to a secondary location and providing a clean room to recover into. Because the next question that comes up is, well, what if the bad actors have been in your data or been in your environment for a long period of time, and your data has been infected for 6 months, and then they
Mhm.
decide to attack? How do we know where they've been, where to recover from? And we're going to get to that at the end. I'm going to save the best for last, but that's something that we've prepared for as well.
Okay.
Um, but that testing process, or testing that DR, is important as well. So assuming that they've done all these things at the worst time, they've deleted your backups, making sure that our customers test that process and test it often is important. So we like to do at least 2 tests per year with our customers. We bring up their production environment within our skin in a bubble, so it doesn't affect their actual production, and we can bring their VMs up in a safe room, and they can test it out, meaning they can get multiple people within their organization, someone from marketing, someone from engineering, a C-level, to hop on their computers and VPN in and access their information, but it's in our clean room. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then making sure that it's a third party in a clean room is important, because if ransomware attack happens, typically the authorities are coming in and shutting everything down, or the insurance companies are coming in and saying, "Don't touch anything. We've got to check these things out." So making sure that you've got an independent, safe secondary location is a big part of having a proper disaster recovery plan.
When we get to that point a bit later in the conversation about the offsite backups, could you also walk us through what your experience, or what maybe Assured's experience has been in working with the FBI or law enforcement, kind of what the expectations are there? I think again that'll come a bit later, but that's definitely something I'd love to hear more about.
Yeah, absolutely. We're here as an extension to the IT department, right? So we're leveraging compliant facilities. We have our SOC 1, SOC 2, our ISOs, so that we're making sure that step by step we're checking all the boxes as we go through in the beginning of the entire process, from the backup all the way to the DR side. And when it comes to going through that recovery, we're helping our customers recover that data into our environment so that the investigators and the FBI and whoever comes in can go to the actual production site and do whatever they need to do. Because we host all the main hypervisors within our data center, we just are taking your secondary copy, your backup data, making sure it's clean throughout, and leveraging all of our clean infrastructure to bring up that data and run production within our data center, so that the authorities don't have to worry about your new production running in that second site because all of it's clean and it's
Gotcha.
guaranteed certified clean. So they're just worrying about the infected site, the production site.
How long do those investigations normally last? I guess is it I guess depend on the scale of the breach, the size of the organization? What's most important there?
Yeah, so it really depends on everything you just said, the size, the
Mhm.
scale, but the ability to go in and find, what they access, when they access, where they accessed it. And the
Mhm.
great thing about Rubric, you're like reading from my playbook, by the way. The great thing about Rubric is they have enterprise tools where we can go in and we can look at the customer's environment and run the tool to find exactly uh, where they were infected, so we can go and find it within the VM, so we know all the others are clear. We've run the dot extensions, we've looked for Yara rules, we've done everything that we need to do to make sure everything else is clean. So we found out where the infection is, and then we can find out exactly when it happened. Was it 6 months ago, so on and so forth. So the customer can now decide, well, what am I going to do with that VM? Do I want to recover prior to that event, or do I just want to blow that one away and recreate it while I'm restoring everything else?
Mhm.
So having that information helps the authorities and move quicker throughout their process.
Mhm.
But the other things that we can do are sensitive data discovery. So we can take a look at what was in that VM, so we can scan it and see if there's financial information, healthcare information, or if it was a test dev VM that had nothing important on it. So now
Mhm.
who you need to tell out in the world too, right? These ransomware attacks happen, and if you don't have that information and you've got to go tell the world now that you've been hit, that could hurt your business. That could hurt your the way that you look in the world. So all of those types of things we can offer through our Rubric solution. One protects the customer, gives them the information that they didn't have prior, but to answer your question, it helps those investigations happen much quicker.
Okay.
Um, so we talked about the clean recovery area. We talked about some of those enterprise edition tools that we leverage to find out when and where these attacks happened. But we've really focused on on-prem. We can also do this and have protections in place for the cloud. So we can't assume just because the data is in the cloud, it's not accessible to the bad actors that are out there.
Mhm.
So we can also protect not only on-prem but cloud, SaaS solutions, M365, Salesforce.com. There's a lot of other things, other parts and pieces of the environment that we can protect. So these are all things that we like to talk about for key steps to ensure that you can recover your environment.
Is there one of the challenges we see for, especially with customers we work with within the SLED space, a lot of them, even the mid-sized entities, I would say, are really stretched thin from a personnel perspective. What are the challenges that I guess, what's a common challenge that a customer has brought to you when they're kind of short-staffed or their staff is stretched too thin and they do want to have a more resilient, reliable disaster recovery solution? Is it just the amount of eyes that can be dedicated to it? Is it that, their previous process was too manual? I guess what's the most common complaint you've heard for a customer who's just their team is just overwhelmed?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I have a few case studies. I think that was case study number 2 in here. Yep. So, we have a customer, you mentioned SLED.
Hmm.
SLED space, nonprofit, just some SMB where you've got a single IT director, a single point of
Hmm.
contact, or maybe a very small team. Those folks are focusing on, technology for the entire company. And although
Hmm.
backups are important, it's not critical to your company's mission. Meaning, if you're a bank, you want to leverage your IT team to be better bankers and protect the bank. Um, those are all things that they're focused on, as well as backup and DR. So we like to come in and say, hey, we're going to be an extension to your IT department that is
Hmm.
only focused on backup and DR. That's all we do. And Rubrik is the only technology we focus on. So we've been operators in the space of Rubrik for 8 years. We know exactly what works. We've seen we had the mistakes. We know how to fix them. Um, so we can come in and take that piece of the puzzle away from the IT staff. But when I say away from it, I don't technically mean we're going to take it and they don't have access to it. That's the great thing about this service is we're 24/7, 365 support. We're going to monitor the health of the backups and the replication. We're going to send reports to the customer every day that memorializes a 24-hour period. And we're here to help out with any of the management tasks. So when it comes to best practices for the retention policies, helping with recoveries, training new people as they come on, you're out golfing on vacation and something happens, we're here to help do that recovery until you can get to a computer type thing. So we
Hmm.
really are a fully managed service focused on just that part of your technical environment.
And you just
So
mentioned training. What is that? I guess what does training mean from a DR perspective? Especially if, for something like DR, we like to talk about trying to automate as much of that work as possible just because it kind of takes you out of you can't run the risk of forgetting to do a backup if it's been automated, whatever your schedule might be. But what does
mhm.
training mean within the DR perspective?
Yeah, so training on the technology is going to be important, right? So
Hmm.
understanding how it works, understanding how to leverage the different tools. We're here to help manage that for you, but a lot of customers also want to have a part in that process.
Hmm.
So we're gonna start by teaching them all about Rubrik and the best practices. Now, when it comes to the DR piece, and I'm going to skip through some slides here because that's a great question. When it comes to the DR piece, it's really walking through the DR testing piece. I would call that part of the training because the very
Hmm.
first time you do a DR test, we call it a smoke test. And it's to walk through and make sure all the parts and pieces are working and the customer understands how it's going to work, what's going to happen before it happens. So we create custom run books and boot order scripting for the customer. So we work together to figure out what servers are going to come up in the correct order, and we keep a log of it. So when disaster strikes, the meteor hits, customers driving 3 towns over to get an internet connection, we've already kicked off that DR process.
Hmm.
The customer is going to have a dedicated firewall instance. We can do virtual. If they want a physical, we can rack it in our data center. So if you're a Meraki or Palo Alto shop, whatever the case may be, we can operationalize it. You can put your own in our data center. But it's really the DR tests. So there's 2 DR tests per year is what we're kind of training them up on, and they're learning about and making sure that they can do the smoke test, again being the most important, that first one. um, so that's where they're logging into their environments. They're making sure that the connectivity is in place. The networking is the secret sauce. Your
Hmm.
customers were all once pointed to point A. Now they need to put point to point B, making sure that's working. Making sure our teams are communicating any changes in the environment. So we do quarterly automated recovery configuration reviews to make sure that we can connect and things are working. If not, we'll proactively reach out to the customer and talk about any changes that might have taken place. So when you talk about training for DR, I think that's the most essential piece is going through the testing piece.
Gotcha. And then, of course, feeds into the, kind of having your disaster recovery plan. We talk a lot about having an incident response team, especially when we look at, um, I guess, those that are targeted the most that we work with, which would be K-12s, who on your team is going to manage what. We actually had um, a school that we spoke to at a conference, and their deputy was kind of working as their CIO, and their CIO, I think, might have come from curriculum and ended up coming into IT. And the CIO wasn't really understanding the criticality of certain resources compared to, say, like the school LMS or something like that. And the deputy had to try to educate the CIO on why certain things needed to be recovered in a certain order. So when you're talking about, testing and the simulations and being able to show what's coming up, like which servers are coming up, all of that stuff, I'm thinking back to different conversations I've had, different situations that we've been a part of. And it's so critical to have priority one, priority two, priority three, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And through that planning process, you're also figuring out, like you mentioned, what's the most critical and what comes up first. So another thing that we can provide is some DR resources, so VPU, RAM, and disk that's
Mhm.
available, so you can have some always on VMs. So if you wanted a passive instance of Active Directory up and ready to go, already pre-built, then we can have that for the customer. So they get a 4x32 bundle as part of the package. If they
Mhm.
want to have more reserved resources, that's not a problem. We can build out as much as they need. But the real secret to the sauce when it comes to DR is the fact that they're not paying for any of that vCPU, RAM, or disk for the remainder of their environment. You only pay for it when there's an actual disaster. Those are called on-demand resources, and those
Mhm.
are priced out monthly but billed and metered hourly. So the rest of the environment, you're saving money because you're not having to build this out. You're saving money because you don't have to have a second data center that you purchased with more infrastructure and more people. You're leveraging our second site, you're leveraging our clean room, and you're leveraging the resources that we have available for when you need it.
Mhm. Okay.
We skipped through a bunch of slides, so I'm going to come back and tell you a couple stories. If that's all right. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's okay.
Wonderful. Um, so yeah, so we talked about a customer that had short IT staff. They're it was a one guy shop, very busy, trying to focus on their organization. We've also have oh, and by the way, that customer that we talked about was hit by ransomware.
Mhm.
Um, and we were able to help them recover. So when we're talking about some of these recovery situations, I want to focus on what some of these people have been through.
Mhm.
We were just talking about costs, high costs, complexity. So we have a customer, PBS, that was looking at data center consolidation. How could they save money? And
Mhm.
they were leveraging an entire data center. They bought infrastructure. They had people for a second site that they never used. So they came to us, and by leveraging Rubrik, we were able to operationalize it, put it on premise, and then they leveraged our second site. So we have data centers across the globe where we have multi-tenant Rubrik instances, and they only have to use a small piece of it, so they get the economies of scale.
Mhm.
So they were able to come in, we were able to build a solution where it's a cost per terabyte scenario that included the box on site, the management, the replication, and the disaster recovery as a service.
Mhm.
So we simplified it and we were able to lower their costs. Um, so that was, that's something that we see a lot out in the marketplace, especially for smaller customers. So if you come to our third case study, we have a small community bank, and they have a lot of different locations. So they had 20 locations over 3 states. Uh, the infrastructure was outdated. They're having trouble managing all those sites and understanding all of those locations. So
Mhm.
we have a proprietary technology called Protect View. So that gives us a single pane of glass where we can see all the different backup environments. so that we can triage any issues and solve any problems across those multiple sites. The other thing we were able to do is we were able to put rubric software on third-party hardware so that we were able to drive enterprise technology down market, meaning that we can protect customers that are 2 TB, 5 TB. So this customer had a lot of remote sites that were pretty small, and they wanted to get all of that data back to a single location. So we
Mm.
put remote instances in all 20 locations, replicated back to our main data center, so that they had it all consolidated in case of a disaster.
Mm.
So we're really able to modernize their backup and DR solution.
Is there a, you mentioned a bank, of course we've talked about K-12 and stuff. Is there a compliance component to disaster recovery? I know, like from a cyber insurance perspective, different states have put in mandates or requirements for, cyber insurance coverage, or in the state of Florida, there's been a requirement to adopt either a NIST security framework for public entities or something similar to a NIST security framework. Is there
Mhm.
any state or is there anything at the federal level that's mandating disaster recovery that you've seen, or that, whether it's an industry standard or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had CJIS certification requests for state and local from different states. We had a
Mm.
customer in Colorado, for instance, that needed us to be CJIS certified, which at the time we were not. But after talking to the customer and understanding their needs, we went out and got our CJIS certification for the state of Colorado. So there are some times where we need to go out in order to meet the compliance needs, just go and get it done. A lot of times when folks are going through these compliance scenarios or audits, or trying to qualify for insurance, they really need to check boxes. And what
Mm.
I mean by that is they need to go through certifications, and by leveraging us as a backup and DR solution, we're helping them check certain boxes. Do you have a disaster recovery plan in place? Check. Is your second site is SOC 1, SOC 2 certified or have ISOs? Check.
Mm.
What are the security measures that you have, so that internal employees can access your DR environment, and we use jump boxes? Check. Right. So it's less about the certifications that we have to have, and more about the things that we can provide our customers so that they can check their boxes so they could get certified.
I've heard, so it's funny you talk about checking the boxes, and, like in this case, you would be the third party that's being leveraged to check the boxes. Um, that's something that I think has come up in a few of the webinars or conversations that we've had with, different manufacturers and partners. Being realistic, because I know for some of the customers we have, they can do it on their own. For some of the customers we have, they may not be in a position to. Do you think it'll get to a point where most organizations are just not, like, there's too much for them to do in order for them to be able to check off those boxes by themselves? Because it seems kind of like it's trending in that direction where most, if not all, entities are going to have to leverage a third party in order to, be compliant with whatever it is or check off most of those boxes.
Absolutely. And that's where the economies of scale really comes into place. So it's our ability to go through the grinder, right? So we've got financial
Mm.
institutions, state and local, healthcare, right? So we've got to go through all these different audits as an organization and make sure that we can check all these boxes specifically for just backup and DR, right? So
Mm.
we're very focused on that. And since we're a global organization, data sovereignty rules and different things like that, like we jump through all those hoops. I couldn't imagine if a customer had to do that for themselves. The cost would it would be very difficult to
Yeah.
justify. So by leveraging a third party that only focuses on a certain lane, jumping through all those hoops, paying for all those certifications, and getting qualified is definitely a reason to leverage a third party. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We've seen that. We had a cyber insurance event. I think it was late last year. And that was something that was, you know, discussed as well. Like, make sure your partners are using cyber insurance, not because, you know, it necessarily guarantees your protection, but, you know, there are requirements that they have to go through when they get their insurance policy, and that can help to make sure that there's a little more coverage for you, as far as, are they just checking off the boxes for themselves, to make sure that they're checking off the boxes for you too. So it's kind of like this circular game of, you know, are we all covering our bases and then covering everybody else's bases along the way? It's um yeah, it's very interesting, very interesting. It's always a
Yeah,
state of flux, right?
exactly, exactly. And that's why, being operators in the space and working, and since we only work with Rubrik, we don't use any other competitive technologies. We've built a great relationship with Rubrik, very trusting relationship. So we give them a lot of our customer feedback, a lot of the things
Hmm.
that we're going through, blips in the radar, customer requests for some of the technologies and the solutions. We give that feedback back to Rubrik, and they listen, right, and they can, and then they ask questions, and then they fix, I shouldn't say fix, but they add what is needed to meet some of these customer requests. So it's
Hmm.
a great relationship. I'm very proud to be Rubrik service providers. And you were just talking about insurance, and in this case study that we have right here.
Okay.
And for any of your listeners that are in the Chicago area, there's a beverage distributor that's very large within Chicago. They actually had purchased Rubrik already. So they made a great decision. They bought Rubrik. They were trying to figure out how to do DR on their own, and it became a little more complicated than I think they were prepared for. They were trying to do it in
Hmm.
the public cloud. We're having issues with testing. Just kind of ran into a situation where they needed help. So we came in, we helped them out. We built out a DR solution for them. So it was called a hybrid solution. They already own the rubric, so they just replicate back to us and leverage our clean rooms. Well, lo and behold, it was during the George Floyd riots in Chicago. Some vandals went in, smashed up one of their liquor stores, one of their beverage distribution locations, and unfortunately, some of the infrastructure in the back got destroyed as well. And all the point of sale systems for like 30 different locations through the Chicago area were shut down because it was in the back of that one store. So
Hmm.
they were out of business on a Saturday night during COVID, couldn't sell any liquor or any alcoholic beverages. So they called us up. By Sunday morning, we had brought all of their production infrastructure up in our data center, and they were back in business and running. So at this time, they said, you know what, we got to rebuild. They went out and bought co-location space and cloud. It took them about 3 months to rebuild, but they ran their business out of our DR. After that 3 months, we failed them back over into their new environment. And the cherry on top was their insurance covered their DR costs because they were leveraging Assured Data Protection.
Okay.
So
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
yeah,
So
that's,
no out
that's
of
one of my
pocket
favorite
expense
stories.
for year one.
What's that?
No out of pocket expense for year one.
For the time that they were in that disaster, correct? So the VCP, RAM, and discharges for on demand that we were talking about, that was
Hmm.
covered by insurance.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, but that's just an illustration. You know, you never know. You know, in the Southeast, we deal with hurricanes and tornadoes, you know, throughout, especially when you look at like Tennessee, Arkansas, they get hit by tornadoes. I think Alabama too gets hit pretty regularly. Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, and then up to the Carolinas has to deal with hurricanes and stuff. I mean, natural disasters. You know, of course, there's always something in the news. We always have these different challenges, whatever that might be. But it's just any number of unexpected things. And I mean, that's really what disaster recovery is whatever the unexpected is, you know, we're trying to cover as many bases as we can to be as prepared as possible.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head, right? And really there's two types of recoveries. There's disaster recovery, like you mentioned, the natural disaster, the hurricane, the tornado. Everyone knows you're down and you need to get back up and running,
Mm.
and that something has affected your environment. That's a traditional DR. A cyber recovery is when you've been compromised. and how
Mm.
you recover from being compromised is a very different type of recovery scenario. And that's, when you start leveraging the tools that I was talking about earlier on. So we really are starting to break down the types of recoveries that our customers need, the type of support they need during those different types of situations.
What's the, I guess in my mind, as a just kind of from a non-technical perspective, they seem like they would be similar in that you're dealing with this unexpected incident that's stopping you from being able to do whatever it is that you do from a business perspective, whether it's education, sales, providing services to your local constituents, whatever that might be. From your perspective, what is maybe the big difference or the various differences between a traditional disaster recovery event like caused by a hurricane as opposed to caused by a ransomware event?
Yeah, so the ransomware event is where you've been compromised, right? So someone has been in your environment. So there's different types of tools that you need to leverage so that you can get more information about what has happened to your environment. So with a
Okay.
standard DR, disaster recovery, you know what happened. Hurricane hit. You went through a flood. Recovering from that process is really finding a new location, rebuilding and repointing the backups to that after it's been running in our DR site. If you've been compromised and the bad actors have gotten in there, you need to figure a few things out before you can even recover. One, what did they compromise? Was it in the network? Was it in the infrastructure? Right?
Mm,
If you were trying to recover back into your own environment, you're going to get reinfected.
mm,
So if you don't know, you need a clean room. You need that second site to recover into, just as a starting point.
mm,
And then from there, that's when you leverage the tools to start breaking down part of the what we call ransomware investigation. So it's going in to the environment, it's scanning everything, and it's finding out, what's in there. Is it a known malware? Is it something that that has been out there? If it's sometimes if it's smaller customers, then it's a smaller attack, right? It's more known, so it's easier to find. It's really when you start getting into the federal space, very large organizations where the attacks are a little bit more complex.
mm,
So sometimes the ransomware investigation is easy. You go in, you find a dot extension, and you know exactly where they hit. But that's what we do. So we're going to go in, scan the environment. We're going to see where the bad actors, or where they got in and what they used.
mm,
We're then going to do that sensitive data discovery to see, what they got into. Was it something that you need to report because it is classified or healthcare or financial, or is it something you don't need to report to the world because it was test dev?
mm,
So now that's very important to figure out. Is this something that I need to go tell the world about or not? And then it's that incident containment. How far back did they get in there? Have they been in there for 6 months, 8 months, a year, and being able to recover everything else, and then figure out if you're going to blow that one away or recover prior.
gotcha.
So the cyber recovery adds a lot more of that in-depth discovery and giving the customer some of that knowledge that they need, the information that they need.
What was the, I guess from an assured perspective, what was the most maybe challenging or difficult investigative process that you guys have been a part of? Because I think for, like if we're looking at one that we helped with recently, the investigation wasn't too crazy. The recovery was challenging because there were, a variety of resources at different levels of, some close to end of life, some past end of life, some resources that had the right, security monitoring and protection tools on them and others that didn't. So there were other difficulties in recovery that didn't make the investigation necessary. So when I'm hearing you say, it can be a different type of investigation or different standard of investigation depending on organization size, whatever, what's been your hardest one from an assured perspective?
The hardest one from a ransomware
Yeah.
perspective. Oh man, that's a good question. Because when we're doing these types of recoveries from ransomware events, it's built out in kind of the same fashion, right? So
Mm,
customers are replicating to our second site, so they have a copy of data that we can scan and use all these tools for, and then we have our clean room scenario where we can bring them up. Now, this is what we call a tier 3 solution. So if a
mm,
customer has purchased a tier 3 and they get all of these things, then it makes it much easier to do the recovery. We have other levels of solutions where you don't get all the parts and pieces, meaning that, our tier 2 solution, you can replicate your data to our data center, but you're not doing the DR testing piece.
mm.
So I think it gets a little bit more difficult if we haven't done the testing, if we
Okay.
haven't gone through the scenarios. So we've had some customers that that hadn't done the testing that were hit, and it took longer than they had hoped because we had to kind of go through everything as it was happening while they're in the worst situation of their life,
Mm,
professional lives. They're trying to rebuild and recover and figure things out. Now, fortunately, our team has been through this a time or two, so we're able to guide them through it and make it a situation where it was much better than to not have a third party, right? Because if you think about it, the world has changed so much, and
mm,
we're over here at Assured, we're backup and DR guys. Our CTO, his name is Andrew Eva. So in his prior life, he worked for a company that worked, is a very large company, worked with 3-letter organizations.
mm,
And 10 years ago, if you asked him how many ransomware attacks or how many DRs did you do per year where you actually had to recover customers' data in a clean room, and he'd say about 3 or 4 times a year. We are in a constant state of recovery these days. We're recovering our customers weekly, if not multiple times a week, right? Different customers.
mm.
So, there's complexity to it, but there's also a lot of people that are getting hit with ransomware these days.
Yeah,
Um, but the great news is none of our customers have ever had to pay a ransom.
gotcha. So I guess kind of focusing on that, it's recovery isn't so much about, I mean, having the tools and the technology that you talk about for investigation and stuff is helpful, but making sure that you're going through the steps and the processes day by day is also incredibly critical to how quickly you'll recover. And I mean, that's kind of the advantage of having a third party that can be fully dedicated to it, is that, that kind of, it takes one stressful thing off your plate and you know that it's going to be done. But I think that's kind of, we see that same, I think it's probably that same answer that's applied to probably most aspects of IT today, whether it's a data security perspective, a network security perspective, server updates and infrastructure management. It's kind of the continuous process. And I know for any customers or people that are going to be listening to this, it's kind of, that answer kind of sucks to hear, but it's kind of, that continuous process is the only way to make sure that you are reducing your vulnerability, closing your gaps if something occurs, making sure you're ready for it. Because like you said, those customers who, didn't really want to, maybe didn't see the value up front of the regular annual testing. When you're in that situation, you've never tested before, and now you got to test in a live bullet situation. There's a value to being able to test when there's a value to going to practice before you go to the game, so to speak. So that's kind of what that is, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the, what's the word, minutia. It's the day by day stuff. It's the all the little parts that add up to the big parts, and that's the
Hmm.
great thing about having a managed service, right? Not only on the front end are we doing the monitoring, the reporting, and the management piece, but one of the teams that I run is our client services team. So our
Hmm.
client services team is ensuring not only the happiness of our customers, but making sure they're leveraging the value of their solution. So we'll do quarterly business reviews where we talk about what they're backing up, how they're backing up. Are we getting everything that you need to get? Are there new things that have been added to your environment? How did your test go? Did you have a successful test? Is your data growing faster than you were prepared for it to grow? And do we need to go through and do an audit and maybe delete some old data so that you're not paying more than you wanted to? So there's an entire team that is here at Assured Data Protection to make sure, one, that you're using the technology that you paid for, you're getting everything out of it that you wanted, and that you're happy with your solution. So that's a big part of the managed services piece as well, is just making sure that they're going through that part of the process as well. So we're very adamant about doing those quarterly business reviews as well as that DR testing, so that when disaster does strike, everybody's ready to go.
Gotcha. You mentioned, deleting old data. I don't know if you have a number or a ballpark, but how much of your the average customer's data do you think is maybe irrelevant? Like how much data? Because I know that we're constantly collecting data, but how much of that data, like for us, as far as being able to process credit card payments from customers, we don't store any of that data. We utilize, like you talk about a third party, we leverage a third party to help with that process. We don't store that data. We don't hold that data. If there's somebody who's in a situation where maybe they're storing data that they can offload to a third party, don't need to store data that maybe they just didn't need to take in, but they do have. How often do you see something like that from a customer?
All the time, all the time. So we have different tiers of storage as well to help with that.
Mm-hmm.
So the rubric that is on premise. I mean, we're operationalizing. We put it on premise, and that's the spinning disk. It's the high value, right? So you're going to want enough data so that you can recover locally if you need to. So you get some dailies in there, maybe 30 dailies, something like that. But as the data gets older and ages off, then we move it from the rubric to archive.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got different types of archive that we can leverage. So for your weeklies, your monthlies, your yearlies, you can keep that on less expensive disk, but it's still able to recover. It just depends on your RTOs, right? So we will work with our customers to make sure they're getting value out of what's on the high value stuff versus the lower cost like S3 storage. So that's important. But we also go through in the very beginning of the process, we're going to go through, if they're a VMware environment, so we host all the main hypervisors, Hyper-V, VMware, and AHV. If they're VMware, we're going to go through their RV tools, and we're going to go and make sure that we understand what's critical in their environment, right? So maybe they've got 20% of their environment that is super important. We need to make sure that is being replicated, and that's what we're going to focus on DR. Maybe the rest of it is, not as critical, don't need to have that up quite as quickly, could take a little bit more time. So that's not going to be in the DR, but that'll just be replicated over to our data center. So we can go through from the very beginning, help classify that data so that they're paying for the recovery time objectives that they need for, depending on how critical the parts and pieces of the environment are. So we help with that too.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's funny that you said, could be up to 80% of an organization's data that's not critical. We think of disaster recovery as like, I want to be able to get back everything immediately. But that may also not be realistic and may not be necessary for you to get back up and running.
Absolutely. Like, do you need your printers?
Yeah, we can
Or
figure
do
that
you
out.
need your point of sale system, right? So it's
Yeah.
100%. And our DR teams work through that with our customers to make sure, again, they're paying a higher value for that tier 3 DR. So if you don't need it for the entire environment, then we'll work with you to make sure that you have exactly what you need at the cost points that you need it at. So that's very
Gotcha.
important. And we had some slides here that kind of show about what types of environments that we can back up. And I mentioned that we do host Hyper-V and VMware and AHV in our data center, so that we have like-to-like hypervisor recoveries. But we can also do hard stuff too. So if you're getting an SAP or Kubernetes or Oracle, sometimes can be difficult with licensing for DR testing and things of that nature. Those are some things that we can focus on premise. Public cloud, we can back up and recover data in Azure, AWS, or GCP. So there's different ways that we can do that for our customers. So we can get data in tenant in multiple regions, archived offsite if you want to get your cloud data out of the cloud and into our data center. So there's different ways we back up public cloud. And then SaaS, we mentioned M365, but we can also do G Suite, Microsoft Dynamics, OCI, Salesforce.com. So there's a lot of different parts and pieces to a customer's environments where you can leverage our economies of scale, our managed services, and the ability to operationalize all this and deliver it as a service.
Okay. You used the phrase RTO before. What does RTO stand for?
Recovery time objective. Sorry.
Okay. Gotcha.
Sometimes it just comes out. Yeah, there's recovery point objective and recovery time objective. So how far back do how quickly do you need it back up, and how far back in time do you need to go? Meaning, like, do you need it in, you can't go without more than 15 minutes of data, or, an hour of data, and depending on what you need will depend on the type of work that we do and how we back it up, and costs, of course.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, we're talking about our services, and how it works. And we're starting to get into how we kind of price things out. There's 4 pillars to the service. So there's managed backup. Everything that we do is managed. Again, the customer has the ability to do their own recoveries and restores and build out their retention plans, but we could also do that for them, and be here as a resource. There's a tier 1 where we can operationalize Rubrik and put it on customer premise. And they can have local recovery capabilities, and we can archive it. That is the kind of the simplest solution. So people with very small budgets, where they just need something in place, operationalized, and delivered by a third party, that's kind of where it starts. The next level is offsite replication. So it's replicating data from on-prem into that secondary location. It can be within a customer's data centers, or most likely they're going to replicate to one of our data centers. We have them, again, across the globe. So if you've got those Southeast folks that want to get their data to Virginia or Chicago or somewhere out of the Southeast, we could do that for them. And then, of course, disaster recovery as a service is our tier 3. And cyber resiliency piece is the enterprise edition tools I was talking about when it comes to cyber recovery. So that's the different types of services and how we kind of build it out for our customers.
Okay.
I jumped through a lot of the slides, but I think I pretty much got through all of them for today. Did you have any other questions for me or anything else?
No, I think I want to do this again with you, and probably get some questions that can come in from our community for you. But I appreciate you walking through some of this. I mean, I took a lot of notes. The ability to leverage, and you mentioned it a few times, leverage a clean environment to assist with that recovery process, to assist with the testing process, and making sure that, whether it's FBI or local law enforcement, I guess, investigation, or just being able to know what it is that you have and how that process is going to go for you. I think the key takeaway is that you're going to have to put in a lot of effort to be prepared, and to make sure that you know what's going on, and to know how, you're going to be able to recover. And it's unfortunate, because that ends up coming up a lot when we speak to customers about what can you do to protect yourself. But whether it's cyber hygiene and phishing training, policy development, data security practices and protocols in place, or preparing for a cyber incident response team, disaster recovery plan, all of those things, it's just constant effort. It's constant effort. And that's the value of partners like Assure. That's the value, hopefully, of partners like DOF. But hopefully we can take some of that effort off of their shoulders, and yeah, it's just more work for everybody.
Yeah, well, the great thing is you're not alone, right? So you got assured data protection that is going to help guide you through, the implementation, through the setup, and into support, right? And I hate to use the term "set it and forget it" because that's not what's happening. But once you get the backup set up, and get the replication set up, then a lot of that hard work is done from that perspective. And then it's building out that disaster recovery plan and working with the team to focus on the recovery of that data. That part is where you really want to just make sure you're communicating, keeping up to speed, touching base once a quarter, testing it a couple times a year, right? So it's the setup part, it takes some time to learn and get through the training and through that implementation process. But once you get through that, and once you get through working with the DR team, then it's just nurturing it, it's taking care of it, staying on top of it, communicating. So it does get a little bit easier once you kind of get through it. And then of course, when you're in a disaster, we're right there by your side. We're guiding you through it. Again, we go through it daily, weekly, if not daily. So we know exactly what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and we're going to be there for our customers.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Brian. Thank you for being on with us. Brian from the Assured team and Saeed with DOF Creation. So thank you guys. And we'll be doing this again.
Awesome. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you.